Hi, good afternoon. So you're here because you're interested in new and growing businesses. Well, in practical terms, I guess that means one of two things. You're either already busy growing a business, or perhaps you're thinking about which business it is you would like to start next. I do a bit of both, but most of my time at the moment is spent on thinking about what new businesses I would like to launch. And I'm a little bit of a self-confessed new business geek. I love startups, and I find them absolutely fascinating. I've been involved in quite a few over the years, starting back at university. And I guess over that period, I've learned that there's an awful lot of mistakes that you can make that can have a really serious impact on your ability to get business to grow and to achieve its potential. And I know this because I've made most of those mistakes myself at various different times. But I've also found that there's quite a long list of things that, if you get them right, it's going to take your business a very long way to actually achieving its potential and to achieving some success. And on that list is a whole bunch of things, but at the top of the list, there is one thing that stands out above all others. And it isn't about the team that you can build around you. It isn't about the culture that you can build around that team. It isn't about your insight into the customer base that you might need to understand. It isn't about your ability to raise capital. It isn't about your ability to work your network. These are all important things, for sure. But there's one thing that stands out way above all of these in determining whether or not you're going to succeed as an entrepreneur. And that is the choice of business model. Now, in a way, this may sound obvious, but part of what I want to talk to you about this afternoon is I believe that many entrepreneurs fail to give the business model selection process the rigor and attention that it deserves. So what I'd like to chat you through, there we go, is a little bit about why picking the right business model is important. I'll tell you about my experience with Streetcar, and we went through a very rigorous business model selection process there. And then I'll share with you some of my thoughts about where I think the really exciting opportunities are in Africa right now. So why is a business model selection process so important? Well, I speak to lots of people who say they would like to start a business of their own. And what they often seem to say is that I'm very keen, I'm just waiting for the right opportunity to come along. It won't come along. You can't just sit there waiting for the right business opportunity to fall into your lap. Business model research, to my mind, is proactive. It's a rigorous process. It's extensive and highly structured. And you've got to throw out masses of business opportunities. And you've also got to have really clear criteria for the rationale that you're going to use to pick your business. And secondly, business model trumps everything else when it comes to determining success. So let me give you some examples. If you've got a great team in a really conducive business environment, working on a great business model, they're going to win. If you've got a great team working in a really conducive business environment and it's a poor business model, they're going to lose. But here's the good news. If you've got an average team and it's a reasonably conducive business environment in which they're operating and they're working on a great model, generally they'll win. So my goal, I guess, really today is to try to help you think through what it is that you would like to launch if that is your goal. So let me tell you a little bit about Streetcar, bit of a survivor's tale, I suppose. A success story as well. So Streetcar grew to be the largest car-sharing business in Europe. And so what is car sharing? Here's a nice affluent couple who would like to use a car for a little while. So rather than owning a car or hiring one, they're going to use car sharing. So what you do is you book a car online or over the phone, in 30-minute segments. So the minimum booking time is just 30 minutes, or you can book it for anything up to 6 months, however long you need it for. And at the beginning of your booking time, you go to the car's home spot. So each car's got its own reserved parking bay, generally off-street, but sometimes on-street like this one in the photo. And you go to the car at the beginning of your booking time, and you swipe a smart card, which has got RFID NFC chip embedded inside it, over a card reader which has been fitted to the inside of the car's windscreen. The doors pop open, you hop in, you put in a PIN code into the immobilizer, which you find in the car's glove box, and that turns off the immobilizer inside the car. Take out the car's keys. For a quick check around the car for any damage. If you find anything, just report it back to the car sharing HQ. And off you go, and however long you need the car for. And at the end of your trip, you bring the car back to its home location and jump out, swipe the card once more across the card reader, and the car's doors will lock, and you walk away. So as the customer, that's where you're finished, other than the billing. The car, meanwhile, sends an encrypted data SMS message back to HQ and tells us how far you drove and how long exactly you had the car. And the revenue model is an annual fee, so it was £60 to be a member, and an hourly or day charge, depending on how long you had the car, combined with a mileage rate. So if you were doing a super long trip, then there were some additional charges for mileage, because the cost of the petrol is included in the time and distance charges. So this kind of service appealed to people who perhaps work in the city, they live out in the suburbs, they travel to work by public transport, and they still need access to a car twice a week, wants to pop to the supermarket and wants to get out of the city for the weekend. And the real benefit is that they lose the cost and hassle of owning a car. So the cost is significantly lower. You're not having to deal with depreciation and all of the running costs of a car. But the hassle is also, we found, one of the big elements that made people sign up. So rather than having to organize parking permits, servicing for the car, repairs when something went wrong, people were able to just use the car and they need it, not worry about it when they weren't driving it. So let me tell you a little bit about how the business came about. So I grew up in the UK and went to university there. My graduate employer, fresh out of uni, sent me over to Johannesburg, which is where my love for South Africa first took root. And I had a few happy years in Johannesburg before going back to the UK, where I did an MBA. And then in 2002, started talking with a friend of mine from university, Brett Acker. Brett and I had a slightly drunken conversation that we would start a business together at some stage. So in 2002, we started looking at a whole bunch of opportunities. And we looked at everything from organic foods to training businesses. But we got to a list of hundreds and hundreds of businesses that we considered. By 2003, we had a short list, and car sharing was at the top of it. And as we considered whether or not we should go ahead and launch, we found that there were some pros and cons. On the pros list, we found that the criteria for our business model selection that we'd set out in advance, all of those criteria had been met, and that the focus groups were perhaps even more positive than we could have hoped for, so signaling really, really strong demand. The cons, well, there was both Brett and I were in very sensible corporate jobs at the time with good prospects and so good security, but no real excitement. There was none of the entrepreneurial buzz that we were both looking for. There were some competitors in the market. So there were two startups offering car-sharing services in London, which was where we started. And there was also a little company called Avis that was doing the same thing in London and also looking to roll it out in a few other cities. But we felt that these were manageable, so we took the plunge. 2004, we launched with 8 cars in 4 locations in Clapham in southwest London. And it was just the two of us for those very first few months, and we were doing absolutely everything. So we were handing out flyers at tube stations, we were meeting every customer when they signed up, and we were even washing the cars. We really did get our hands dirty, and it had a very useful function in making sure that we understood the nuts and bolts of the business. But we got some good traction. So within a few months, we had a few hundred members. We also, we had our first acquisition approach, somebody trying to buy us, just 12 weeks after we launched, from one of the largest oil companies in the world, trying to improve their environmental credentials. So I think at that stage, we were already beginning to sense that our long and pretty rigorous process of business model selection was starting to pay off, that we'd identified a really interesting model. In 2005, we raised our first angel funding round, and in 2006, we raised a second angel round, a much larger one that enabled us to really start to scale up the growth of the business, the infrastructure, and the team, and we were able to really start to build a culture inside the company. I think the real feature of those first 2 years for me was just, it was hard work. It's kind of a bit of a haze now, to be honest, but we were working 7 days a week. I think it was 2.5 years before we had our first day off, so 900-odd consecutive 12 to 16-hour days. Sounds pretty hard, and thinking back on it, I'm not quite sure how we survived, but it was an enormous amount of fun, actually, just throwing yourself into something with that amount of vigor. And then in 2008, we went ahead and raised a much larger funding round. So we raised $10 million from a VC company in London, and we used that to really accelerate the rate of growth of the business. We also raised a $20 million asset finance facility. And this is where we had one of many doses of pretty good luck, actually. We closed the asset finance round just 3 weeks before Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. And obviously at that stage, overnight, the debt markets closed to growing businesses in a way, I guess they haven't really properly reopened today. So, we were very lucky with that bit of timing. By 2010, we were starting to achieve some real scale. So we had about 75,000 members by this stage, who were using about 1,500 cars. We had about 300 employees. Zipcar was an American business with a very similar model to our own. And they had approached us several times over the years because they wanted to combine the two businesses, to merge them. They'd started before we did, and so they were larger. But we'd always declined their approaches because we were growing so much faster. But in 2009, when they approached us, they actually brought something different. They had lined up an IPO with Goldman Sachs as the lead underwriter. And that was very attractive to us. So in 2010, we merged the two businesses together. And in 2011, that combined business listed on NASDAQ. And for a very few short, glorious days, the combined business was worth over $1 billion. It didn't last very long at that valuation, the public markets being rather fickle, but that's a different story. So that's the potted history of Streetcar. So if I look at Streetcar almost as a case study, why do I think it was successful? Why did it succeed? So I think there's probably 6 things. Luck. I think anybody who doesn't say they've had a bit of luck is a little disingenuous. But I think we did a reasonable job with the execution. I had an excellent co-founder. We had a good overlap in our skills and good complementary skills as well. A lot of hard work. Had good sales skills, I think, so we were able to sell the business to investors, to potential employees, to motivate the team. So much of a growing business is about sales. But most of all, we had a great business model. So how do we go about selecting that model? So you won't be surprised to hear it was a rigorous process. And we were highly methodical about it, actually. So we outlined in advance the criteria that we were going to use to decide whether or not we would go ahead with a business. We generated an enormously long list of opportunities. So we had literally hundreds before we started to whittle them down. And this is something which I see sometimes entrepreneurs will go a little wrong here. They'll maybe get a list together of 3 to 5 opportunities before they then start to try to whittle them down. And I think that's refining the process too early. It's much better to cast the net wide and whittle down from hundreds. And we also did masses of research. We really made sure that we understood our market. So desk-based research, market research, focus groups, secret shopper, we did the lot. And I found that you can't be shy about these research processes. So phone people up directly, ask them questions. It's amazing how helpful many people will be. Talk to the suppliers, work LinkedIn. There's a whole bunch of different ways. But we did a bunch of research. So what did our criteria actually look like? We had 2 different groups of criteria. So we had some criteria for what the business should look like and the fit with what we were going to do. So the business criteria, we wanted to make sure there was a very strong degree of customer demand, that it was scalable, it was saleable. There's no point slogging away at something for 7 years if you're not going to be able to get a return from it. We wanted to make sure there was a sensible competitive environment, a decent product to market fit, and we wanted to ensure that what we were doing, that technology was actually a proper enabler of change. And in terms of the fit with us, so did we understand the market, really understand the market deep down? And what are our skills? How do we map our ability to execute with what the business's demands are? Were we interested in the market? Again, you don't want to work for 7 to 10 years on something if you don't find it terribly interesting. And then what's the cash requirement? Could we actually fund it to the point where we could then attract in external capital? So if you're thinking about a business of your own, you're probably thinking by now, well, okay, great, I get it. You've got to be rigorous, got to be proactive, got to work hard at planning. It's a big process. What am I meant to be doing? So, well, I guess here's the good news. I've worked as an entrepreneur in the UK, so across Europe, in the US, and now here in South Africa. And I think that there are better opportunities as an entrepreneur here in Africa right now than there are in the UK, the US, or in Europe. So in the US or the UK, in these kind of major continental mega markets, it's very tough. So it's tough because to identify the opportunity. It's tough because you have to be a bit of a futurologist in a way. So what you're trying to find is that overlap between how technology is changing, how society is changing, how is the commercial environment changing, a bit of regulatory environment in there as well sometimes. And where can I then find this kind of small incremental improvement in something that will then become a business that I can then scale? I mean, it's making my head hurt already. I mean, that is a tough, tough process. Now, the flip side is if you can get it to work, the markets are huge, and your ability to create a billion-dollar business, it's greater than it would be than if you were starting a business here. But it's not to say that in South Africa it's easy, but I don't think it's as tough at the moment. And I think this is something that will change over time. So I'm spending a lot of my time at the moment looking for new opportunities, and these are the areas that I'm looking in, which I think are the highest potential right now. So, really rock-solid execution. I think there are a number of industries in South Africa or across Africa at the moment where the incumbent service offering is simply not that strong. And there's an opportunity to come in and just out-execute them. So that's a combination of product design, of marketing, and quality and reliability of the service offering. The second area is about kind of jumping intermediate steps, and this is something I think we do very well here in Africa. So this is perhaps when people went straight to mobile phones without having had a landline first, or M-Pesa providing banking facilities to somebody who never had a deposit account. And then the last is what I call business model arbitrage. Slightly clunky term, but what I mean by that is there's a whole bunch of businesses that are operating internationally, which we don't have here in South Africa, and there's no good reason for that. Sometimes there is a good reason, but in many cases there isn't. So, I mean, a great example of that is a business I'm involved in here called Baby Group. Baby Group is an online retailer for mum and baby. And they've done a great job of bringing together a bunch of related models which have performed very strongly internationally. So forums, listings, blog aggregator, and branded courses. And these guys are demonstrating that kind of international arbitrage model really works. They've been growing 9% a week since they launched. So, to sum up, as an entrepreneur, the choice of business model that you make is by far and away the single most important decision that you will make. And so you have to approach it in a proactive, structured way. It's a rigorous process. And the only way that you should go ahead with a new model, with a new business launch, is if you're absolutely sure that that is the best model out there at the moment. And the only way you can be sure of that is if you've looked at every single model across the market. That's me. Thanks very much.